Welcome to a Fireside Reading of David Copperfield by Charles Dickens, Chapter 35, Part 2. I was trying to familiarize my mind with the worst and to present myself the arrangements we should have to make for the future in their sternest aspect, when a hackney chariot coming after me and stopping at my very feet occasioned me to look up. A fair hand was stretched forth to me from the window, and the face I had never seen without a feeling of serenity and happiness from the moment when it first turned back on the old oak staircase with the great broad balustrade, and when I associated its softened beauty with the stained glass window in the church, was smiling at me.
"Agnes!"
I joyfully exclaimed.
"Oh, my dear Agnes, of all people in the world, what a pleasure to see you!"
"Is it indeed?" she said, in her cordial voice.
"I want to talk to you so much," said I. "It's such a lightening of my heart only to look at you. If I had had a conjurer's cap, there is no one I should have wished for but you."
"What?" returned Agnes.
"Well, perhaps
Dora first," I admitted, with a blush. "Certainly Dora first, I hope," said Agnes, laughing.
"But you next,"
said I.
"Where are you going?"
She was going to my rooms to see my aunt. The day being very fine, she was glad to come out of the chariot, which smelt, I had my head in it all this time, like a stable put under a cucumber frame. I dismissed the coachman, and she took my arm, and we walked on together. She was like hope embodied to me. How different I felt in one short minute having Agnes at my side. My aunt had written her one of the odd, abrupt notes, very little longer than a banknote, to which her epistolary efforts were usually limited. She had stated therein that she had fallen into adversity and was leaving Dover for good, but had quite made up her mind to it, and was so well that nobody need be uncomfortable about her. Agnes had come to London to see my aunt, between whom and herself there had been a mutual liking these many years. Indeed, it dated from the time of my taking up my residence in Mr. Wickfield's house. She was not alone, she said. Her papa was with her, and Uriah Heep.
"And now they are partners," said I. "Confound him."
"Yes," said Agnes. "They have some business here, and I took advantage of their coming to come too. You must not think my visit all friendly and disinterested, Trotwood, for I am afraid I may be cruelly prejudiced. I do not like to let papa go away alone with him."
"Does he exercise the same influence over Mr. Wickfield still, Agnes?"
Agnes shook her head.
"There is such a change at home," said she, "that you would scarcely know the dear old house."
"They live with us now."
"They?"
said I.
"Mr. Heep and his mother."
"He sleeps in your old room," said Agnes, looking up into my face.
"I wish I had the ordering of his dreams," said I. "He wouldn't sleep there long."
"I keep my own little room," said Agnes, "where I used to learn my lessons." "How the time goes! You remember the little panelled room that opens from the drawing-room?" "Remember, Agnes? When I saw you for the first time coming out at the door with your quaint little basket of keys hanging at your side." "It is just the same," said Agnes, smiling. "I am glad you think of it so pleasantly. We were very happy."
"We were indeed," said I.
"I keep that room to myself still, but I cannot always desert Mrs. Heep, you know." "And so," said Agnes quietly,
I feel obliged to bear her company when I might prefer to be alone. But I have no other reason to complain of her. If she tires me sometimes by her praises of her son, it is only natural in a mother. He is a very good son to her." I looked at Agnes when she said these words, without detecting in her any consciousness of Uriah's design. Her mild but earnest eyes met mine with their beautiful frankness, and there was no change in her gentle face. "The chief evil of their presence in the house," said Agnes, "is that I cannot be as near papa as I could wish, Uriah Heep being so much between us, and cannot watch over him, if that is not too bold a thing to say, as closely as I would. But if any fraud or treachery is practicing against him, I hope that simple love and truth will be strong in the end. I hope that real love and truth are stronger in the end than any evil or misfortune in the world." A certain bright smile, which I never saw on any other face, died away, even while I thought how good it was and how familiar it had once been to me. And she asked me, with a quick change of expression, we were drawing very near my street, if I knew how the reverse of my aunt's circumstances had been brought about. On my replying no, she had not told me yet, Agnes became thoughtful, and I fancied I felt her arm tremble in mine. We found my aunt alone in a state of some excitement. A difference of opinion had arisen between herself and Mrs. Crupp on an abstract question, the propriety of chambers being inhabited by the gentler sex, and my aunt, utterly indifferent to spasms on the part of Mrs. Crupp, had cut the dispute short by informing that lady that she smelt of my brandy, and that she would trouble her to walk out. Both of these expressions Mrs. Crupp considered actionable, and had expressed her intention of bringing before a British Judy, meaning, it was supposed, the bulwark of our national liberties. My aunt, however, having had time to cool while Peggotty was out showing Mr. Dick the soldiers at the Horse Guards, and being besides greatly pleased to see Agnes, rather plumed herself on the affair than otherwise, and received us with unimpaired good humour. When Agnes laid her bonnet on the table and sat down beside her, I could not but think, looking on her mild eyes and her radiant forehead, how natural it seemed to have her there, how trustfully, although she was so young and inexperienced, my aunt confided in her, how strong she was, indeed in simple love and truth. We began to talk about my aunt's losses, and I told them what I had tried to do that morning. "Which was injudicious, Trot," said my aunt, "but well meant. You are a generous boy. I suppose I must say young man now. And I am proud of you, my dear. So far, so good. Now, Trot and Agnes, let us look the case of Betsy Trotwood in the face and see how it stands." I observed Agnes turn pale as she looked very attentively at my aunt. My aunt, patting her cat, looked very attentively at Agnes. "Betsy Trotwood," said my aunt, who had always kept her money matters to herself. "I don't mean your sister, Trot, my dear, but myself, had a certain property, it don't matter how much, enough to live on. More, for she had saved a little and added to it. Betsy funded her property for some time, and then, by the advice of her man of business, laid it out on landed security.
That did very well and returned very good interest till Betsy was paid off. I am talking of Betsy as if she was a man of war. Well, then Betsy had to look about her for a new investment. She thought she was wiser now than her man of business, who was not such a good man of business by this time as he used to be. I am alluding to your father, Agnes. And she took it into her head to lay it out for herself. So she took her pigs, said my aunt, to a foreign market, and a very bad market it turned out to be. First, she lost in the mining way, and then she lost in the diving way, fishing up treasure, or some such Tom Tiddler nonsense, explained my aunt, rubbing her nose. And then she lost in the mining way again, and last of all, to set the thing entirely to rights, she lost in the banking way. I don't know what the bank shares were worth for a little while, said my aunt. Cent per cent was the lowest of it, I believe, but the bank was at the other end of the world and tumbled into space, for what I know. Anyhow, it fell to pieces, and never will and never can pay sixpence. And Betsy's sixpences were all there, and there's an end of them. Least said, soonest mended. My aunt concluded this philosophical summary by fixing her eyes with a kind of triumph on Agnes, whose colour was gradually returning.
Dear Miss Trotwood, is that all the history?
Said Agnes. I hope it's enough, child, said my aunt. If there had been more money to lose, it wouldn't have been all, I dare say. Betsy would have contrived to throw that after the rest and make another chapter, I have little doubt. But there was no more money, and there's no more story. Agnes had listened at first with suspended breath. Her colour still came and went, but she breathed more freely. I thought I knew why. I thought she had had some fear that her father, her unhappy father, might be in some way to blame for what had happened. My aunt took her hand in hers and laughed. Is that all? Repeated my aunt. Why, yes, that's all. Except, and she lived happy ever afterwards. Perhaps I may add that of Betsy yet, one of these days. Now, Agnes, you have a wise head. So have you, Trot, in some things, though I can't compliment you always. And here my aunt shook her own at me with an energy peculiar to herself. What's to be done? Here's the cottage, taking one time with another, will produce, say, £70 a year. I think we may safely put it down at that. Well, that's all we've got, said my aunt, with whom it was an idiosyncrasy, as it is with some horses, to stop very short when she appeared to be in a fair way of going on for a long while. Then, said my aunt after a rest, there's Dick. He's good for 100 a year, but of course that must be expended on himself. I would sooner send him away, though I know I am the only person who appreciates him, than have him and not spend his money on himself. How can Trot and I do best upon our means? What do you say, Agnes?
I say, Aunt, I interposed, that I must do something.
Go for a soldier, do you mean? Returned my aunt, alarmed. Or go to sea? I won't hear of it. You are to be a proctor. We're not going to have any knockings on the head in this family, if you please, sir.
I was about to explain that I was not desirous of introducing that mode of provision into the family, when Agnes inquired if my rooms were held for any long term.
You come to the point, my dear, said my aunt. They are not to be got rid of for 6 months at least, unless they could be underlet, and that I don't believe. The last man died here. 5 people out of 6 would die, of course, of that woman in Nankin with the flannel petticoat. I have a little ready money, and I agree with you. The best thing we can do is to live the term out here and get a bedroom hard by. I thought it my duty to hint at the discomfort my aunt would sustain from living in a continual state of guerrilla warfare with Mrs. Krupp, but she disposed of that objection summarily by declaring that on the first demonstration of hostilities she was prepared to astonish Mrs. Krupp for the whole remainder of her natural life.
I have been thinking, Trotwood, said Agnes diffidently, that if you had time—
I have a good deal of time, Agnes. I am always disengaged after 4 or 5 o'clock, and I have time early in the morning. In one way and another, said I, conscious of reddening a little as I thought of the hours and hours I had devoted to fagging about town and to and fro upon the Norwood Road, I have abundance of time.
I know you would not mind, said Agnes, coming to me and speaking in a low voice, so full of sweet and hopeful consideration that I hear it now, the duties of a secretary.
Mind, my dear Agnes?
Because, continued Agnes, Dr. Strong has acted on his intention of retiring and has come to live in London, and he asked Papa, I know, if he could recommend him one. Don't you think he would rather have his favourite old pupil near him than anybody else?
Dear Agnes, said I, what should I do without you? You are always my good angel. I told you so. I never think of you in any other light.
Agnes answered with her pleasant laugh that one good angel, meaning Dora, was enough, and went on to remind me that the doctor had been used to occupy himself in his study early in the morning and in the evening, and that probably my leisure would suit his requirements very well. I was scarcely more delighted with the prospect of earning my own bread than with the hope of earning it under my old master. In short, acting on the advice of Agnes, I sat down and wrote a letter to the doctor stating my object and appointing to call on him next day at 10 in the forenoon. This I addressed to Highgate, for in that place, so memorable to me, he lived, and went and posted myself without losing a minute. Wherever Agnes was, some agreeable token of her noiseless presence seemed inseparable from the place. When I came back, I found my aunt's birds hanging just as they had hung so long in the parlour window of the cottage, and my easy chair imitating my aunt's much easier chair in its position at the open window, and even the round green fan which my aunt had brought away with her screwed on to the window-sill. I knew who had done all this by its seeming to have quietly done itself, and I should have known in a moment who had rearranged my neglected books in the old order of my school days, even if I had supposed Agnes to be miles away, instead of seeing her busy with them and smiling at the disorder into which they had fallen. My aunt was quite gracious on the subject of the Thames. It really did look very well with the sun upon it, though not like the sea before the cottage, but she could not relent towards the London smoke, which, she said, peppered everything. A complete revolution in which Peggotty bore a prominent part was being effected in every corner of my rooms in regard of this pepper, and I was looking on, thinking how little even Peggotty seemed to do with a good deal of bustle, and how much Agnes did without any bustle at all, when a knock came at the door.
I think, said Agnes, turning pale, it's Papa. He promised me that he would come.
I opened
the door and admitted not only Mr. Wickfield, but Uriah Heep. I had not seen Mr. Wickfield for some time. I was prepared for a great change in him after what I'd heard from Agnes, but his appearance shocked me. It was not that he looked many years older, though still dressed with the old scrupulous cleanliness, or that there was an unwholesome ruddiness upon his face, or that his eyes were full and bloodshot, or that there was a nervous trembling in his hand, the cause of which I knew, and had for some years seen at work. It was not that he had lost his good looks, or his old bearing of a gentleman, for that he had not. But the thing that struck me most was that, with the evidences of his native superiority still upon him, he should submit himself to that crawling impersonation of meanness, Uriah Heep. The reversal of the two natures in their relative positions, Uriah's of power and Mr. Wickfield's of dependence, was a sight more painful to me than I can express. If I had seen an ape taking command of a man, I should hardly have thought it a more degrading spectacle. He appeared to be only too conscious of it himself. When he came in, he stood still, and with his head bowed as if he felt it. This was only for a moment, for Agnes softly said to him, "Papa, here is Miss Trotwood, and Trotwood, whom you've not seen for a long while." And then he approached, and constrainedly gave my aunt his hand and shook hands more cordially with me. In the moment's pause I speak of, I saw Uriah's countenance form itself into a most ill-favoured smile. Agnes saw it too, I think, for she shrank from him. What my aunt saw or did not see, I defy the science of physiognomy to have made out without her own consent. I believe there never was anybody with such an imperturbable countenance when she chose. Her face might have been a dead wall on the occasion in question, for any light it threw upon her thoughts, until she broke silence with her usual abruptness. "Well, Wickfield," said my aunt, and he looked up at her for the first time, "I have been telling your daughter how well I have been disposing of my money for myself, because I couldn't trust it to you, as you were growing rusty in business matters. We have been taking counsel together and getting on very well, all things considered. Agnes is worth the whole firm, in my opinion." "If I may humbly make the remark," said Uriah Heep with a writhe, "I fully agree with Miss Betsy Trotwood, and should be only too happy if Miss Agnes was a partner." "You're a partner yourself, you know," returned my aunt. "That's about enough for you, I expect. How do you find yourself, sir?" In acknowledgment of this question, addressed to him with extraordinary curtness, Mr. Heep, uncomfortably clutching the blue bag he carried, replied that he was pretty well. He thanked my aunt and hoped she was the same. "And you, Master, I should say Mr. Copperfield," pursued Uriah, "I hope I see you well. I am rejoiced to see you, Mr. Copperfield, even under present circumstances." I believed that, for he seemed to relish them very much. "Present circumstances is not what your friends would wish for you, Mr. Copperfield, but it isn't money that makes the man, it's... I'm really unequal with my humble powers to express what it is," said Uriah with a fawning jerk, "but it isn't money." Here he shook hands with me, not in the common way, but standing at a good distance from me and lifting my hand up and down like a pump handle that he was a little afraid of. "And how do you think we are looking, Master Copperfield? I should say, Mr. fawned Uriah. "Don't you find Mr. Whitfield blooming, sir? Years don't tell much in our firm, Master Copperfield, except in raising up the humble, namely mother and self, and in developing," he added as an afterthought, "the beautiful, namely Miss Agnes." He jerked himself about after this compliment in such an intolerable manner that my aunt, who had sat looking straight at him, lost all patience. "Deuce take the man," said my aunt sternly. "What's he about? Don't be galvanic, sir." "I ask your pardon, Miss Trotwood," returned Uriah. "I'm aware you're nervous." "Go along with you, sir," said my aunt, anything but appeased. "Don't presume to say so. I am nothing of the sort. If you're an eel, sir, conduct yourself like one. If you're a man, control your limbs, sir." "Good God," said my aunt with great indignation, "I am not going to be serpentined and corkscrewed out of my senses." Mr. Heep was rather abashed, as most people might have been by this explosion, which derived great additional force from the indignant manner in which my aunt afterwards moved her chair and shook her head as if she were making snaps or bounces at him. But he said to me aside in a meek voice, "I am well aware, Master Copperfield, that Miss Trotwood, though an excellent lady, has a quick temper. Indeed, I think I had the pleasure of knowing her when I was an humble clerk before you did, Master Copperfield, and it's only natural, I'm sure, that it should be made quicker by present circumstances. The wonder is that it isn't much worse. I only called to say that if there was anything we could do in present circumstances, mother or self, or Whitfield and Heep, we should be really glad. I may go so far," said Uriah with a sickly smile at his partner. "Uriah Heep," said Mr. Whitfield in a monotonous, forced way, "is active in the business, Trotwood. What he says I quite concur in. You know I had an old interest in you. Apart from that, what Uriah says I quite concur in." "Oh, what a reward it is," said Uriah, drawing up one leg at the risk of bringing down upon himself another visitation from my aunt, "to be so trusted in. But I hope I am able to do something to relieve him from the fatigues of business, Master Copperfield." "Uriah Heep is a great relief to me," said Mr. Whitfield in the same dull voice. "It's a load off my mind, Trotwood, to have such a partner." The red fox made him say all this, I knew, to exhibit him to me in the light he had indicated on the night when he poisoned my rest. I saw the same ill-favored smile upon his face again, and saw how he watched me. "You are not going, Papa?" said Agnes anxiously. "Will you not walk back with Trotwood and me?" He would have looked to Uriah, I believe, before replying, if that worthy had not anticipated him. "I am bespoke myself," said Uriah, "on business. Otherwise I should have been happy to have kept with my friends, but I leave my partner to represent the firm. Miss Agnes, ever yours. I wish you good day, Master Copperfield, and leave my humble respects for Miss Betsy Trotwood." With those words he retired, kissing his great hand and leering at us like a mask. We sat there, talking about our pleasant old Canterbury days, an hour or two. Mr. Wickfield, left to Agnes, soon became more like his former self, though there was a settled depression upon him, which he never shook off. For all that, he brightened and had an evident pleasure in hearing us recall the little incidents of our old life, many of which he remembered very well. He said it was like those times to be alone with Agnes and me again, and he wished to heaven they had never changed. I am sure there was an influence in the placid face of Agnes, and in the very touch of her hand upon his arm that did wonders for him. My aunt, who was busy nearly all this while with Peggotty in the inner room, would not accompany us to the place where they were staying, but insisted on my going, and I went. We dined together. After dinner, Agnes sat beside him as of old and poured out his wine. He took what she gave him and no more, like a child, and we all three sat together at a window as the evening gathered in. When it was almost dark, he lay down on a sofa, Agnes pillowing his head and bending over him a little while, and when she came back to the window, it was not so dark, but I could see tears glittering in her eyes. I pray heaven that I may never forget the dear girl in her love and truth at that time of my life. For if I should, I must be drawing near the end, and then I would desire to remember her best. She filled my heart with such good resolutions, strengthened my weakness so, by her example, so directed. I know not how she was too modest and gentle to advise me in many words. The wandering ardor and unsettled purpose within me, that all the little good I have done and all the harm I have forborne, I solemnly believe I may refer to her. And how she spoke to me of Dora, sitting at the window in the dark, listened to my praises of her, praised again, and round the little fairy figure shed some glimpses of her own pure light that made it yet more precious and more innocent to me. Oh, Agnes, sister of my boyhood, if I had known then what I knew long afterwards. There was a beggar in the street when I went down, and as I turned my head towards the window, thinking of her calm, seraphic eyes, he made me start by muttering as if he were an echo of the morning, blind, blind, blind. Thank you all so much for joining me. I am so sorry I was late today. Hopefully that won't happen again. I read every day at 5 Pacific at Fireside Reading on Instagram Live. Please join me. We read a chapter or so a day, and all the readings that we do are uploaded to the YouTube channel Fireside Reading, where you can check them out and listen and watch in your own time if you would like. Please subscribe to that if you would like, and comment. I very much like getting those. Until I see you punctually tomorrow, please stay very well, everybody. Good night.